Trying to catch me howling at the moon.
What you need to know to pour epoxy as a beginner. Hey, welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Drew with American Made. This video, I am going to cover everything I have learned in my recent pours. I'm doing some knotty alder tabletops. I'm filling all the knots, holes, checks with black epoxy. Over the course of the last couple weeks, I've made a ton of mistakes. I am gonna tape the living out of this table because I want to make sure and not have any more leaks. So in this video, I'm going to share to you the biggest questions I had when I was starting and the biggest mistakes I had made and how you as a woodworker can prevent those mistakes. So thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe, and as always, keep hammering. When it comes to pouring epoxy, there's a few things you need to consider. How deep of a pour, how quick you want it to cure, how clear the finished product needs to be. Right now, I'll just give you an example of what I'm working with. I have some knotty alder tabletops that I'm going to be filling the knots with black pigment. So as far as the clearness and the finish, I'm just using black, so it's not that critical. The first go round on these pours, I use liquid glass, Super Clear 2.0. On epoxies, it will tell you the thickness of the pour. 2 to 4 inches thick. Just know on those thicker pours, that means it's going to cure longer. It's also going to provide you a better finish depending on if you want that clear. I decided to switch to liquid glass, deep pour 24 hours. That means you can pour it, come back the next day, and hopefully you can continue to work on your project. It's not going to slow you down. Maybe a tendency for more bubbles in this. I am just going to assume that the clearness or the finish is not going to be as high, but whereas I'm using black, it doesn't really matter. Just because when I used the 2 to 4, the cure time was about 3 days before I could get back and do any work on it, and that is in a temperature controlled shop. Some of you guys this time of year, now where it's getting cooler out, that is really going to be a factor. The target temperature is around 70 degrees when you're working with epoxy. So keep that in mind. That's going to lengthen your cure times. This epoxy has about an 8 to 10 hour working time. So I'm not getting an open time on the 24 hour, but the way it typically works is I can only pour up to a maximum of 1 inch. Now I bought this off Amazon. It is a 2 to 1. Okay, so first pour with the 24 hour. It is much lighter, or the viscosity. It is much thinner. Poured real easy, mixes up easier. The hardener is more yellow and like pure liquid. So it might require more color. Liquid glass is what I have used so far. Reason being is these are tabletops and these are food grade. So that was really important to me. It seems to me that they claim these are BPA free. I'm not sure how they could do that just because of the fact that BPA in large part is a large constituent in epoxy. They market it as BPA free and they market epoxies as food grade once cured. That is another thing when working with epoxy. Make sure you are wearing appropriate PPE when doing any of this stuff. I see a lot of people online using N95s. That's not enough protection, especially if you're pouring or you're sanding. There is another thing. I see a lot of people wearing the wrong cartridges. Either you want to be wearing a vapor cartridge when you're pouring, and then when it comes later in the project to sanding, make sure you're wearing something for the particulates. I will link down below to some good options for each different scenario, but make sure you are wearing appropriate PPE during this process. So in your stages, after you get your project milled down, no matter what you use, there's going to be air bubbles. So what you're going to need is some CA glue. This is Star Bond Medium. I wanted something that would get down easily in all the cracks and crevices, and you will just mix up the same pigment you were using in your epoxy with your CA glue. That way, when you're sanding through it, any holes you uncover, you can fill, set up in 20 seconds, and you can go back to sanding. Starbond does make black CA glue. I did order some, it's on the way. We'll see how that works. I will just be using the same pigment I used in my epoxy. So now that we covered a little bit about epoxy, and the basic premise is the epoxy is marketed to a certain thickness of pour. The greater the thickness of pour, longer the open time, longer the cure time, and it's just gonna make your project go that much longer. So when you see those 5-minute quick epoxies, those are probably only an 1/8 inch, a 1/4 inch. Reading on a Facebook group I'm a member in, and somebody used a quick epoxy and tried to pour it like an inch thick, ruined their project. It'll end up smoking, cracking, basically it'll have to all be removed. So you really want to pay attention to the epoxy part. It's not complicated. Just know that you need to use an epoxy for the thickness that you intend to pour. So just for example, I'm pouring these tables. I'm going to start using a 1-inch thick epoxy from now on. So I just know, since these tables are 2 inches thick, my first pour, I cannot go greater than 1 inch, and I'm going to have to do it in 2 pours. Where I was using the 2 to 4, I could pour it to the top right off the bat, but it was taking too long to cure. And not only that, but if you have leaks and have touch-ups, that's why I just wanted a quicker curing epoxy. That way it's going to get hard faster, I can get on, sand it, and it's just going to speed up my whole process. Here's the 2 products. Here is the 2 to 4 thick liquid glass deep pour 24 hour. They should have inch thick listed right on there to not confuse people, because that is very important. Don't forget about the thickness. I see a lot of people ask this question, but you can buy these at any big box store. And if I need a 2 to 1, here's my ratios. So I come down, and here would be in this column, the 2 to 1 column, I would pour 1 part here. And you can see, and then when I add the additional up to the 1, that's at a 2 to 1 ratio. Same thing here. If I would pour the 2 parts of my 2 to 1, I'd fill up to the 2, and then this up to the 2. And that might seem kind of goofy to some people, but it's, you're pouring your 2 first, and then you pour the rest of it up to the line, if that makes sense. Or a simpler way, kind of idiot proof, is let's say I pour 20 ounces of my first part A, then I would only need 10 ounces of my part B. And almost easier is just buying 2 separate cups, and you can either use milliliters, ounces. For instance, my part A, I'm going to go 8 ounces, and that is my 2. My 1, I would pour an additional cup. Half of 8 is 4 ounces, and then I would pour it into another container and mix it. A critical part of mixing is make sure you use a plastic stick. Do not use a wooden paint stick. It will introduce micro bubbles. And when you're stirring, you're not trying to stir fast. You're just trying to stir a good controlled speed as to not mix extra air into your mix. Another super handy tool that you want to have is these Bondo cards, not only for spreading your epoxy around, but also for smoothing out your tape. You're going to want 2 tapes, a tuck tape for your forms, and then for me, what I found is the easiest to seal the backside of knots so you don't have leaks is using Tyvek tape. Tyvek tape has worked incredibly well for me. When you put it on, just make sure and use the card and get out all the air bubbles to make sure you have really good adhesion, but it's worked great. My first pour, I tried to make a mold with masonite and tuck tape, and I hot glued the whole backside of the slab. It was a ton of work. Took half the day to get everything up, and it leaked all over. So So you can see how much epoxy on that end is wasted. Not the result I was going for. That's why this deep pour I'm using is kind of a pain, because it's not set up, and you can see just by tilting it, it kind of started to run out. I think the 24-hour would really be nice, keep things moving along. But you will want tuck tape as well if you're going to build molds, or if you have a river table, then obviously you need a mold. Also, for active leaks during a pour, this flex paste is a real lifesaver. I've seen Blacktail Studios use it. He seems to have a lot of disasters during his pours, but I think anytime you build a mold, you're probably going to have a leak. So make sure and also have some flex paste on hand. Now, if you are a beginner, this next part is something you may want to think about when it comes to finishing your project. You really need to step up in the line of sanding equipment you have. I tried originally to finish these tops using my cheap 5-inch Makita, and all the pigtails, it was just crazy. It looked terrible. I finally made the jump and got into a Festool. I bought the Festool ETS EC155. There's a few upgrades you want to make right now from all the talk online. These are the best sanding discs for epoxy. These are the 3M Extract Cubitron. Great with dust extraction. The only thing you're going to have to buy is an additional hook and loop adapter to work with the mesh disc. You can purchase that on Amazon. Also, after looking into these sanders, I seen it recommended to buy the hard pad that changes out for the 155. On Amazon, it populated the hard pad right after I bought this, and it turns out they sent me the wrong one. So be aware of that. This is for a Rotex. On Amazon, it didn't say that. Make sure it's designated. Between the Rotex and the ETS, there are a difference. I have a review coming out on this sander, but I absolutely love it. Highly recommend it. I was between the Festool. Early on, I was looking at a Rotex, but I would not recommend that for your first sander after talking to various professionals. The 3M Extract is at a little bit lower price point and looks good. And Mirka is another top brand. And also SurePrep. But after watching Spencer Lewis for years and always hearing him talk about Festool sanders, that's obviously what I ended up buying, and I couldn't be happier. So if you're in the market, I would highly recommend the Festool. And I bought the 6-inch, so that's the 155 millimeter stroke, and I absolutely love it. It still does a great job of knocking things down with like an 80 grit, and then when you step up, you still have just a beautiful, flawless finish. If you have questions, please comment down below. I hope this video helped somebody, so please hit like, hit subscribe, and as always, keep hammering.